What was that sigh? Are you not excited?
I am, and I'm not. It's cool. It was a wild reading.
Yes.
I enjoyed myself reading it.
That's good.
I'm not trying to be down on the reading or anything like that. I'm more down on the world, and I feel like I don't understand anything. And this didn't help.
Oh,
and I was looking to Nietzsche to really prop me up this week, and
you were?
Yeah, elevate me, make me feel good, make me feel like I have a good handle on things, and he did not help at all.
Yeah, no, I would not do that with Nietzsche. He'll definitely confuse you more.
Yeah.
I mean, he had that whole point. So, yeah, we're finishing up the Antichrist today by Friederich Nietzsche.
Freddie.
Nietzsche. Freddie. Yeah.
Freddie, sorry.
Yeah, Freddie. And he had this whole part in it about basically how you should, like, smart people are skeptical, essentially.
Right.
And how you shouldn't have, what was it? Starts with the C. Essentially scruples.
Scruples?
Yeah.
Oh, conviction.
Conviction.
Yes. Yeah, I have notes about that. Yes.
Freedom from convictions of any kind. Mm-hmm. The capacity for an unconstrained view pertains to strength, whereas the need for belief, for some unconditional yes, conversely, the need and no. Sorry.
What?
For some unconditional yes and no, Carlyleism, if I may be excused the expression, is a requirement of weakness.
Right. Okay.
So, yeah, I mean, it's like you have convictions in so much as they're a means.
Right.
But a truly strong person realizes that convictions are prisons.
Right.
Basically.
Yes. I mean, he goes so far as to say that a conviction and a lie are not even different things.
Yes. Which is where he ties it back to the priest.
Yes.
And how everything the priests say. Yeah, I mean, so the Antichrist, to sum it up, of course, is anti-Christianity. It's Nietzsche's. By the way, I misspoke. It was 1895 that it was published. I don't know where I got that it was published like 10 years after his death. But maybe.
I thought I heard it was published after his death, though.
I thought it. Well, you might have heard that from me. I'm spreading misinformation. So apologies.
Yeah.
1895, but it was held off because of basically it's incendiary. It's a big diatribe against Christians and Christianity and Germans, and I mean he goes after everybody in this. The Jews.
Yeah, there's a lot on the Jews. I have some notes.
I knew you were gonna. I brought it up first this time.
Yeah, I mean he does a lot.
So it's funny. I was listening back, and yeah. So the summary is that Christianity is a self-hating religion. It makes you hate yourself. It makes you hate nature and everything natural. It makes you hate your instincts.
I think it's that Christianity is the worst philosophical perspective to ever befall the entire human race.
Yes.
And that all priests of Christianity essentially deserve worse than hell.
Yeah. I mean, that's a much better way of succinctly summarizing it. Exactly. Yeah. And so Nietzsche was basically, he had reached full Nietzsche at this point. He was the Charizard of Nietzsche. I mean, he was just about to go to the insane asylum. Maybe that was the Charizard. Maybe that was the final form. So one thing that I wanted to ask you. So I did a little bit of retrospective work because it's now interesting. Our podcast is almost 20% Nietzsche at this point. We've done 8 episodes now. This is our 8th episode.
We numbered the last one wrong, too. That was my fault.
Oh, I numbered it wrong.
I told you.
You told me it. Oh, what?
We numbered it 28.1, and it should have been 6.
It should be 6.11
or something.
7.
Yeah. Right, something like that.
You're right. No, I'll change it. It won't change on the YouTube.
But we can make a note in the YouTube comment.
Yeah.
It'll make a big difference. People will be confused if we don't change.
People are going to be so confused. But yeah, anyway, this is our 8th episode, and yes, it's the 6.0 series. And I went back and I listened to 6.1. The first 3 episodes were on genealogy and morals. Yep. The second 3 were on untimely meditation.
We would do that so much better now.
We would, and you know what's funny? I think I seed that he is finally saying that the noble morality is the better morality. Right. I was playing plausible deniable, and partly because I did think he was being more plausibly deniable and maybe aseptic in the genealogy of morals. Mm-hmm. But now it is clear. Yeah, I mean, he obviously despises the ressentiment philosophy that's embodied by Christianity, and he thinks that the sort of the noble morality, the good versus bad morality, as is described in Genealogy of Morals, is the better morality. And he's very emphatic about it in this. And there's no doubt.
Right.
So I spent a lot of that first 3 sort of playing the devil's advocate of like, well, he's kind of even-handed. I don't think he's necessarily saying that the noble morality is better, because I did honestly think he was being even-handed there.
Right.
But yeah, at this point, he's definitely not even-handed.
Yeah. I mean, it's possible he was trying to be more even-handed in the genealogy of morals.
Well, I think so, and so that's why I keep bringing back up the fact this is his last one. Genealogy of Morals, I assume it was either the end of the 1870s or beginning of the 1880s. And then Untimely Meditations was like early 1870s. Right. So we kind of have a nice timeline of his writings. And I mean, just in your perspective, what's your opinion about the difference in the writing style between Untimely Meditations, which was like 20 years before he wrote this, and the difference in the person and the tone?
I feel like Untimely Meditations, he doesn't know what he thinks yet. Untimely Meditations was the most confusing.
Yes.
The most frustrating to read. The Antichrist was pretty easy reading. And by easy reading, I mean clear.
And that's funny. So Genealogy of Morals was 1887, so it was just a year before this.
Yeah.
So potentially also he had just clarified all of his opinions.
Right.
And because that's another thing that he says in his Ecce Homo, which he also, I think, wrote in 1888, is that, by the end of it, he was trying to be very clear about what he thought so that there'd be no misunderstanding.
Right.
And it's basically what he's saying in the Antichrist.
Yeah. So what are some interesting takeaways? We could do the anti-Jewish stuff. We can skip it. I think the conviction versus lies is an interesting thing to tackle. There's also some stuff on consciousness that I was curious about your perspective on. A broad theme that I noticed, and I have a number of notes about it, is relating to your thesis on Christianity and Judith Butler, not Judith Butler specifically, but I don't know, I feel like none of the words I use for it are right, because postmodernism is a piece of it, post-structuralism, critical theory, feminism, the academic left-wing movements or something like that.
Of the late 20th, early 21st century.
Right.
What would we call that?
Yeah, I don't know. I guess like left-wing academic movement is sort of a broad umbrella that has all that stuff in it. And so what's interesting is with that, your thesis in mind, reading this, reading how Nietzsche is describing Christianity and Jewish and Christian priesthood, I very much see that connection because it sounds very similar to the sort of apparatus of these intellectual movements.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. There were tons of quotes that I highlighted about where it was like, this is exactly why, this sounds exactly like what postmodern, woke, left intellectual type wants. And it talks about how, let's see.
27 had a good one. He's talking about the use of, like quote logical consistency to create falsehoods, which sounds to me very similar to, or feels to me very similar to reading something like Judith Butler, where it's filled with something that seems very logical and very robust and confusing, to essentially dismantle all truth.
Yeah, but also I was trying to hone in on the democracy stuff he kept bringing up.
Yeah, yep, there's that too.
I'm trying to find, there's like a really good quote for that.
That was like, I believe, towards the middle end, somewhere in the late 40s and 50s.
That's what I thought.
I have a note. Is it number 57, which is a long one, but towards the end of it? Because that's where I have a note where he's talking about caste.
I found one, but yeah, you can read. Let's read them both.
So he's talking about caste orders and how Christianity defies nature by suggesting an egalitarianism among people. And he's describing how a caste system of mediocre people at the bottom all the way up to exceptional people at the top is the natural order of the world. And he says, let us not underestimate the privileges of the mediocre. Life becomes increasingly difficult the higher up you go. It gets colder. What?
Can you go earlier, actually? Yeah, I'm glad you pointed this out. This was something I wanted to bring up too, but I think it starts a little bit earlier.
Sure.
Where in 57 is this? Let us not underestimate. Yeah, can you start? I think this whole part is actually really good to read because I think it gets at exactly how he conceives humanity.
If you've got it, maybe if you found the spot.
Yeah, they are the most venerable kind of, maybe from the most spiritual human beings.
Okay. The most spiritual people, being the strongest, find their happiness where other people would find their downfall. In labyrinths, in harshness towards themselves and towards others. In trials, they take pleasure in self-overcoming. Asceticism is their nature, requirement, instinct. They see difficult tasks as a privilege. They relax by playing with burdens that would crush other people. Knowledge, a form of asceticism. They are the most admirable type of people, which does not prevent them from being the most cheerful, the kindest. They do not rule because they want to, but rather because they exist. They are not free to be second. The ones who are second, these are the custodians of the law, the guardians of order and security. These are the noble warriors. This is above all the king as his highest formula of the warrior, judge, and preserver of the law. The ones who are second are executives of the most spiritual people. They are closest to them, belong to them, and take over everything crude in the work of ruling. They are their attendants, their right hand, their best pupils. In all of this, to say again, there is nothing arbitrary, nothing contrived. Anything different is contrived to put nature to shame. Caste order of rank, is just a formula for the supreme law of life itself. Splitting off into 3 types is necessary for the preservation of society, to make the higher and highest types possible. Unequal rights are the condition for any rights at all. A right is a privilege. Everyone finds his privilege in his own type of being. Let us not underestimate the privileges of the mediocre. Life becomes increasingly difficult the higher up you go. It gets colder. There are more responsibilities. A high culture is a pyramid. It needs a broad base. Its first presupposition is a strongly and healthily consolidated mediocrity. Crafts, trade, farming, science, most of art, in a word, employment, can only really function on the basis of mediocrity of ability and desire. This sort of thing would be out of place among exceptional people. The associated instinct would contradict both aristocratism and anarchism. Should I keep going, or?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I kind of feel like, I mean, this is exactly it, though. How he feels about things, and I mean, you don't have to. This probably gets it. To be a public utility, a cog, a function is a natural vocation. For the mediocre, it is happiness to be mediocre. Mastery is one thing. Specialization is for them a natural instinct. It would be quite unworthy of a more profound mind to see an objection in mediocrity as such. It is even the prime requirement for the existence of exceptions. A high culture is conditional upon it.
I think if we're here, we might as well finish it, because the end is important, too.
Okay. May I?
Yeah.
When an exceptional human being handles the mediocre more gently than he does himself or his equals, this is not mere politeness of the heart. It is simply his duty. We talked about this and he talked about this in the Genealogy of Morals. His duty. Whom among today's rabble do I hate the most? The socialist rabble.
Right.
The Chandala apostles who undermine the worker's instinct. Also, apologies if Chandala is not politically correct. I feel like in India, it might not be a politically correct term. Because it's a term for the underclass,
right,
the untouchables,
right.
You know, who make his pleasure, his feeling of a contentment with his little state of being, who make him envious, who teach him revengefulness. Injustice never lies in unequal rights. It lies in the claim to equal rights. What is bad? But I've already answered that question. Everything that proceeds from weakness, from envy, from revengefulness. The anarchist and the Christian have a common origin.
Right.
How do you feel about that?
I think he's probably talking about 19th century anarchist movements. Probably not anarcho-capitalism.
It was mostly anarcho-communism then, right?
Right. But I get where he's coming from with it, including anarcho-capitalists, and this goes back a little bit to discussions we've had about sort of a natural order of society. The question that I had for you, actually I had a question for you about it, because we've discussed this before, where you say that you think that democracy is the natural order of society. It sounds to me like Hoppe is saying it's the exact opposite. Democracy is a lie, essentially.
This is where I think it's helpful to think about things with respect to consciousness. And why the level of consciousness of the population is important for deciding what sort of government works best. Because I think for a democracy to work, you need you have a highly conscious population, because you need people to be thinking about other people. You need empathy. Mm-hmm. I think for it to work well, because you need to understand why you can't have everything that you want, right? In some sense. And it feels like, I've said this before, where I feel like Christianity is leaning into consciousness. Mm-hmm. And there's quotes in here that make me feel like Nietzsche thinks similarly, although I think he
also says that Christianity is the negation of consciousness too.
Exactly. He's contradictory with it. But he talks about it more in the sense of like inward reflection versus reflection into the past and the present. I actually think those are both consciousness.
Right.
Because it's like you can't reflect into the past and the present without consciousness. You know, you're just in the moment if you don't have consciousness.
Right.
Time doesn't exist if you don't have consciousness. There isn't a past and a present and a future to project into if you're not conscious.
Right.
So they're meaningless words. What I'm getting at is basically, though, that I think he thinks about it obviously slightly differently than me, because I then also, he puts Buddhism and Christianity in some ways on the same axis, in that they're both nihilistic, right? Or ascetic. What did he call it?
They're both. What's the word that he keeps using?
Decadent.
Decadent. Yes, they're both decadent.
Yes, they're both decadent. But Buddhism is more realistic than Christianity. That's another sort of through line to the Antichrist, is that it's a very unrealistic. It hates reality, and it again, it hates the instincts, and it's about pushing everything to non-real things like the afterlife. You push your hopes to the after the reality, essentially. And so this is another way, though, that I think it serves evidence that Christianity requires consciousness.
Because to push towards not real things requires consciousness.
Exactly.
That makes sense.
Yes.
Requires consciousness
Buddhism,
and will lead to the death of.
Yeah, because also I think that there's this battle between the body and the mind, and that the mind is trying to get away from, but also control the body. And I feel like the body, I don't know. Anyway, I'm anthropomorphizing, but I suppose it is us that we're talking about.
So my question for you, though, was, it seems to me like Nietzsche is saying that democracy and any type of egalitarian system, like one man, one vote, anything like that, where people are considered equal in some sense, is anti-nature and essentially a form of life hatred and unnatural.
Yes, I think he thinks that.
Right. And so my question to you is, we've had conversations where you've argued, if I'm remembering correctly, that you think that democracy is the most natural way of organizing people. And,
I see what you're getting at.
And so what do you think about that?
Well, I think it's a question of our definitions of natural.
Right, fine. Yeah. That's a good point. That's fair.
Because essentially what I'm getting at when I say natural is, I mean, without doing anything, without any outside influence, what is the trajectory of humanity? And if democracy is the hyper-conscious government, if that's the government that a hyper-conscious population creates,
right?
And it seems like civilization's trajectory is increasing consciousness, and by that I mean the awareness of its population, then the natural progression of our government system would be towards democracy. Because because of what I just said. But that's not to say that it's, natural maybe isn't the right word to use. It's just that it seems like, because then what I think Nietzsche's saying when he talks about unnatural, but he doesn't say it in these terms, is he really is calling consciousness unnatural. I think he has a disdain for consciousness, I think, as I think Foucault does. And I think that when he talks about unnatural, it's about getting back to the animal state where you're not conscious and you're just working off of instincts.
Right.
And I think that's what his big point about how Christianity's sort of made sick humans because it's selected for conscious beings. Yeah. Because in some sense, too, you have to be maybe more conscious if you are weaker, like, constitutionally. Because consciousness is a survival mechanism. So if you can't outcompete somebody on the plains, physically, then you need to outsmart them.
Right. There's a section that I highlighted that I was going to ask you about with the consciousness. So we can jump to that because I'm curious, sort of going along this line about Nietzsche directly addressing consciousness, and if you feel like it still fits with what you're saying.
Sure. I don't think it completely fit. What he's saying is, it's like I haven't quite pieced it out, but I feel like I'm getting at it, but it's on a different axis than what I'm talking about. Because I'm talking about consciousness versus no consciousness, whereas Nietzsche doesn't talk about it in those terms. He's talking about it, I guess, natural versus unnatural.
Right. But what you just said makes sense to me about, depending on how you're defining consciousness, the idea that if you're, say, physically weaker, you're going to have to be more conscious because it will require sort of your success will require more planning.
Right.
I get that. That makes sense.
Yeah, and also, what does civilization call for? It calls for more consciousness in every measure because it's like, just navigating society requires consciousness.
Right. I mean, I'm not sure. When he talks about like the noble civilization of Rome and the success of masculinity and things like that, is that calling for more consciousness? I don't know.
No, I think it's calling for less in the population. I think it's saying, and this is why I wanted to read that part that we just read, because he lays out what he thinks I guess you could say, quote, natural form. And it is natural in the sense that it was the first thing that human society, so far as we know, took a form. This was the way that humans organized themselves, was, as Nietzsche described, where you had a highly sort of conscious intellectual elite who could do whatever they wanted, basically. And what they did was good, right? That was the whole genealogy of morals conclusion, is that it was good was based off of the stature of the person that was doing it, and then you had their advisors, and then you had sort of the mass,
right?
You had the aristocracy, and then you had the masses, and I just think that it's like if it wasn't the Jews that did it, some group of people would have basically pushed the quote resentment morality, which is the morality of consciousness. I think.
Well, but I think it also is not the reality of consciousness. And this is like I'm just looking at this quote here.
I said morality.
Sorry, morality. Yeah, right. Because his whole argument is that the philosophy of faith is specifically sort of at odds with consciousness because it is consciously ending awareness. It's saying, I'm not going to investigate. Yes. I'm not going to think about anything.
Yes, but it gave us so I agree. This is completely correct. It was, this was a big reason that he hated it, and also it fought against science, right? And he had this whole part in the Antichrist that was interesting, talking about, book 1, Genesis, and how Genesis lays out the psychology of the priestly type.
Right.
Because what does it start with? It starts with a God that's bored. So what does he do? He makes man, but then man's bored, so he makes animals. He's still bored, so he makes a woman. And now he's not
What
bored
was he doing with those animals? That was so boring.
Yeah. So, sorry, let me just find this part because I had a note about it. And then, you know, it goes into this whole thing about, you know, which also, I don't know, I guess there's plenty of feminists that are loud about this, but I don't know how more people don't talk about this, because it is very well understood in Christianity and Abrahamic religions that, like, woman is the evil, and all the evil comes through woman, and they made man eat the apple,
right?
And there's serpentine and stuff like that,
right?
I don't know why we're not talking about that more.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, because Nietzsche just thinks that women are stupid, but not necessarily evil.
I don't think he thinks that.
He says it in here. He said only women and socialists would be stupid enough to believe that that a martyr makes a claim true.
Well, he's laudatory of them in Ecce Homo.
Yeah, he also talks about how the Manu doctrine is much more reconciliatory towards women, but he definitely says that women are too stupid to.
Yeah. Anyway, so the psychology of the priest, though, which is basically a psychology against science, because science, you know, through wisdom or through women enter science, because, you know, it's all about wanting to know. And eating the apple and whatnot.
Right.
And science is the first sin, the germ of all sin, original sin. And this is what you were saying. Man shall not think, and thoughts are bad thoughts. All thoughts are bad thoughts. Man shall not think. And the priest in himself invents distress, death, the danger of life and pregnancy, etc. And then, you know, he goes on in 49, have I been understood? The beginning of the Bible contains the entire psychology of the priest. The priest knows only one great danger, that is science, the sound conception of cause and effect.
Right.
So I hear exactly what you're saying here. I guess the way I look at it is, regardless of what the human church was trying to do after Jesus, right, in the Gospels, the effect of the core tenets of the religion was one that increased the consciousness of the population. And it was one of self-reflection and introspection and thinking about yourself. And I agree, it did lead to a stagnation, but this stagnation came to an end eventually in the Renaissance.
Right.
And I think it was because of that, is that it also created a whole class of people that was literate, you know, which didn't exist in Europe before Christianity and Rome.
And you're saying this is because of Christianity?
Yes. Yes. And
I suspect that Nietzsche would diametrically disagree with you here, but maybe not.
Well, so what I'm saying is Christianity was, okay, here's what I'm saying. The path of civilization is increasing the awareness of people, as it is selecting for people who are more and more conscious. And that's when I think Nietzsche talks about sickly people. I think that's what he's talking about.
So where are you getting that? Or what do you mean by that?
I mean
the path of the statement you just made.
Well, I mean that, you know, civilization is going to... People who are more conscious and more aware will be able to navigate society better and more easily, and will thus propagate themselves more, and that's why.
And that's what civilization is, or something.
And civilization generally helps you survive more than if you were just in the wild. So it's outcompeting the people who are just in the wild,
right? And
then it's also outcompeting the people who, you know, would be better for the wild, that are trying to survive in civilization, because those people are probably going to end up in jail. And so over time, if civilization continues long enough, the population within it will become gradually more and more conscious, and I think democracy will eventually develop. And I think that I was going to talk about this for a specific reason, though. From the Renaissance, because you were saying Christianity turns off consciousness. It's just the idea that Christianity was the first step in a conscious religion, whereas before that, the religions were sort of anti-consciousness. And they also reflected, in my mind, a more schizophrenic brain of the population, as emblemized by the fact that you had multiple gods versus one God. I think the one God idea is a big step in the religious sort of genealogy,
right?
Because it represents, I think, God is consciousness, so it represents a sort of coherence of your mind, of the population's mind. So it starts as an incoherent sort of blob of many gods, and you have gods to represent your emotions. And then as you become more conscious, it coheres into, more and more, coherent awareness. And then we represent it as one God that's telling us what to do and whatnot.
Right. I think...
Is this a good podcast? I don't know.
I think what you're saying makes sense. I think I'm once again at the opposite view of you. But
no, that's good. That's good.
And I don't know what's right. And this is where I started the podcast, is I don't even know how to know what's right. I'm more and more confused every day. But it feels to me like you could make the argument that, say, Rome, pagan Rome, was also in its own way pushing towards consciousness, because the sort of masculine, chauvinistic mastery of self, improving success, almost like proto-capitalistic world that Nietzsche is painting. I'm not even saying Nietzsche's right. It's just like the image I get when I read about what he's talking about Rome. That also sounds conscious to me. The idea of being a bodybuilder is a highly conscious activity, because you need to have enough awareness of yourself to be able to master yourself. And so that's...
Yes. And so what did pagan Rome give birth to? Gave birth to Christian Europe.
Sure. And I think that sort of the hinging factors that Nietzsche is talking about, I would say that Christianity is sort of diametrically opposed to consciousness, are faith and sin. And that those are like philosophical points that erase consciousness. And those are bedrock to Christian philosophy.
I think that the reflection is more bedrock
to Christian philosophy.
Because it's about, again, it's this idea of you need to be the judgment of yourself.
But that's not because Christian philosophy.
Well, no. But okay, sorry, I'm being a little flippant here. It's God that's judging you,
right?
But you're keeping tabs on how well you're doing. Like, you're supposed to keep tabs on it. Whereas that's not a thing it's not a big central thing in many religions before this. I mean, before Judaism too.
Right? But being driven to be successful in yourself, you have to be super conscious of yourself. The idea of sin.
You're talking about the elites of Roman pagan society, though, right?
I'm talking about Nietzsche's idealistic version of Rome. What he's talking about is a society where people are focused on their own sort of self-success. Yes,
but you have most of the population that is the mediocre sort of masses that we just read about.
But they also will have to do that, because they're going to have to be janitors and shopkeepers and stuff.
I don't think he's saying that they should be reflecting on their state.
They will have to do less reflecting necessarily, which is the same as Christianity. God has to be way more conscious than you do.
So I'm sorry, what are you saying, Ben?
I'm saying
I don't
that
know where we're disagreeing or if we're disagreeing.
I'm saying that the bedrock philosophy of Christianity is anti-consciousness at its root.
Yes.
Sin and faith. Now, not all, like Gnosticism, which I think it would be actually interesting. Following this
sin?
reading, what is
sin?
So he talked about sin is.
No, I know.
Yeah.
Yes.
Sin is the force, the anti-God, the antichrist force in the universe. That is the separation from God. And so sin is a force that is affecting all of us. And this is where he was talking about it's a way of stripping nature of its ability. So things that happen to us and things that we do are not even our choice and aren't nature's choice. They are this unnatural, like satanic force.
And that's how Nietzsche would describe that impulse.
Yes,
what would you say that is? Where is that coming from?
Well, from a Christian perspective, Satan.
No, but like
I don't believe in sin.
Head. Yes. Well, but you understand what he's talking about. He's talking about this feeling that you get that something that you did is wrong.
Uh-huh.
Right? I mean, am I interpreting it correctly?
I mean, I think Nietzsche is saying that the priests have sort of crafted this idea in our minds. Yes.
Yes. And that's the point. It's an idea. That's my point. So that's why consciousness precedes sin.
Well, yeah, of course.
Right. No, but it's a very important
Consciousness
point.
precedes sin, but the idea of sin is attempting to strip consciousness.
But it's doing it consciously. It's like
right, but there's no such thing as doing anything unconsciously.
Right. Not if we're working in this realm. But that's the whole point, though, is that even though it is overtly anti-consciousness, I guess is what I'm saying. It is subvertly pro-consciousness. It is pro-consciousness, even though it's overtly anti-consciousness.
Okay, so what do you think about this? The higher reasoning behind a procedure like this, he's talking about God's law being, he talks about this two-wall metaphor about how the God's law is both hidden and experienced. Anyway, so he says the higher reasoning behind a procedure like this involves the intention to push back consciousness gradually, to identify some life as the proper one, which is to say one that has been proven through immense and highly filtered experiences. So like the experiences of the elders of the church, the forefathers of the priests can attest to this experience, and to prevent people from becoming conscious of it. So this has to be magical knowledge that's hidden, that the people can't have. Only the priests can have this knowledge. That's my understanding of it so far.
I'm agreeing with it's overtly anti-conscious.
Right.
I agree with all this.
To achieve a perfect automation of the instinct, this is the presupposition of every type of mastery, of every type of perfection in the art of life. To prepare a book of law in the style of Manu means to give people the right to become master one day, to become perfect, to aspire to the highest art of life. To this end, it must be made unconsciousness. That is the goal of every holy lie.
Right? Yes, I agree. It's trying to make, it is overtly trying to make a mass of unconscious beings.
Right.
My point is, look at what happened. I think it's created a mass of conscious beings.
So it like blew up in their face or something like that.
Yeah, That's why I'm saying it so confidently, is because it's like, I think gradually, and again, this is why you had the explosion of democracy 100 years ago, is it did create a push towards higher consciousness in the populations, and you see that in all sorts of things, like how much more ironic we are. Like irony is a highly conscious thing. in my opinion. It's a very abstract concept, and the level of irony in the population today versus like 100 years ago, if you just look at like political propaganda or for like wars and stuff, it's like there's no question that there's more sophistication now.
Right. Although maybe that's regressing, but who knows?
It might be regressing, and again, this is where it's like, I think certainly Nietzsche was very on point when he pointed out this axis, this noble versus resentment sort of philosophy, and that's how I interpreted Genealogy of Morals. If you go back and listen to the episodes, I mean, what I keep saying is how I feel like what he's saying is that you have these two forces that are sort of fighting and in dialectic opposition and sort of go through waves where one is more dominant than the other. But I do keep coming back to this idea that non-consciousness is anti-civilization. And a push back to the noble religions would be a pushback in civilization sort of form. And now maybe that's good. There are people that might say that's good, like you, who wants us back on the plains. But yeah.
So I think that I don't agree that democracy is a highly conscious activity. I think democracy is a non-conscious activity, or it's pushing towards an unconscious activity, and all socialistic activities are. And I feel like I'm more in line with Rose Wilder Lane on that.
Well, again, I feel like it sounds a little bit annoying, I admit, because I'm always like, but it's the frame of everything, and that's why consciousness, I can always bring it back. But it really is the truth. It's like the fact that you're even asking people their opinion about governing means that you're using more consciousness than like monarchism, for instance, where there's no sort of communication, really, right? There doesn't have to be. Obviously, there is to some extent, and, because a monarch can be overthrown, but
I think it's just distributed differently, because to vote yes or no takes very little consciousness. Like, most people, when they're voting on Prop 28, they're not expending a whole lot of awareness into the implications of that. So no individual is using a whole lot of consciousness in that act, versus a king is going to have to use a whole lot of consciousness.
Well, think about
and so it's in one person a lot, or in a lot of people not much.
Exactly, and so I think I completely agree with you. And so I look at how this country was founded, whereas it started, again, with kind of like the Nietzsche conception of society, where you're going to have just a few people at the top who are highly conscious, and so you'll have a democracy, and you'll assume that the people that have land and have all this extra responsibility are going to be more highly conscious and be thinking about things more deeply.
Right.
But then the idea was that, well, we're now we have universal schooling. Everybody, that wasn't a thing when the country was founded.
Right.
And so now maybe we can trust the population more. And I agree. I mean, it is true that there's a lot of stuff that I vote on that I just like, okay, what political party is this person for? And then I'll vote for them, right?
Right.
But the point is that in theory, it still requires more consciousness from the population. And you just said,
I think that
you have one person versus many.
Yes. Egalitarianism, as I think Nietzsche points out, is unnatural because it requires sort of perfect consciousness of all people.
What is unnatural? What's unnatural, I guess? Because I might agree with you.
What is unnatural? I think that you collect 50 people. They're going to have all different heights, right? Their heights will not be equal. In fact, they might have 50 different heights, and probably there will not be a single height that is exactly the same as another height. Probably. That would be very unlikely.
So unnatural being, you don't find it in nature de novo.
Right. So the idea
without consciousness, essentially.
Right, but so what
being
consciousness might allow somebody to do is come up with some harebrained argument as to how they actually all do have the same height.
Yes,
and
exactly.
Perhaps somebody could come up with an argument like
Yes.
that, and that's essentially what Judith Butler is doing.
Yes.
Maybe, and that's where it's that.
Yes,
I see basically no value in that.
So you are anti-consciousness.
I don't know. I mean, I see value in okay, so I think I figured it out. Why I'm saying that the Roman example is also conscious. I see value in using consciousness for aims like what he's talking about. And this is where I like Hoppe, for aims that have to do with achieving your own success and goals as they relate to you. So like a politic of selfishness or something like that. But I don't mean cruelty and I don't mean victimization. So that whole Reddit thing about Nietzsche supports rape, I have no idea if Nietzsche supports rape. But
you brought it up.
Well, I don't know if he does or he doesn't, but that's not what I'm talking about with the politic of selfishness. I'm talking about something like if somebody wants to be a bodybuilder, that's going to have to be a highly conscious activity. And that is not the same that is not the same utilization of consciousness as trying to come up with some rationalistic argument as to how 50 people are actually all the same height, whether they seem to be or not.
So I think I see where we need to clarify, because I think we actually agree.
Right. Okay.
There's a difference between the proportion of people in a population being conscious and the level of consciousness that people have.
Okay. Yes.
And I haven't clearly distinguished between them. And I think I'm saying that inevitably the idea is as civilization progresses, both of those metrics goes up.
Sure.
So the level of consciousness in the individual and the number of individuals that are conscious, essentially. Like the average level, I guess we could say, of consciousness. It's all the same, I suppose. But okay, so what am I saying, though, is that in your examples, you keep bringing up the idea of like one highly conscious person versus many sort of partially conscious, essentially, right?
I think I'm bringing up two examples of one highly conscious person. In one example, the person's a bodybuilder, and the other one, they're a university professor arguing about people's heights.
But you're bringing it up with the idea you're comparing now, right, versus the society that Nietzsche wants, which was, let's say, it was Rome, right?
Maybe.
You brought it up to discuss that. That's why you're bringing up bodybuilding, right?
Right. I'm saying that you can have that there's different uses of consciousness.
So my point is, yes, I agree. Those two types of people probably have the same. That takes the same amount of consciousness to do that.
Right. Or I don't know if it's the same amount, but yeah.
Or whatever. It takes consciousness to do that. But the question is, how many bodybuilders do you have in the population of Rome versus how many sort of just people who go to the gym casually do you have in our population? It's many more people casually go to the gym now. So it's getting at the point that more people are conscious now than back then, and that's that's the way it would have to be for a society like that to function, because as you increase the consciousness of the quote mediocre people, you get the resentment religion, which is the idea of like, hey, why am I being treated like this? How are you better than me? Because that's what consciousness is. It's like you're reflecting on your own self, and then you're also able to reflect on the state of other people, which allows you to be like, yeah, this person isn't anything.
Right.
I'm much better than this person. Why?
Right, but then he talks about this, about how the socialists lie and all that stuff. About how social. I don't remember if he calls out Marx specifically, but he's definitely referring to that movement when he talks about how sort of like mediocre workers have been tricked into being resentful. When there is no shame. And this is the thing. Like George Carlin has a joke about this I mean, he has jokes about everything, but he has this whole thing about how he would rather hang out with a nice person who's an idiot. There's no shame in being dumb versus an intelligent asshole or something like that. And he's being flippant. He's making a silly joke, but we don't have to live in a society where we shrink metrics to that degree, where there's like mediocre people and these three categories. I mean, I think Nietzsche is also making a mistake in doing that, and he's also cutting against consciousness, because the problem is that society is way more variable than that. And so there are some people who are probably mediocre in most respects, and there are some people who are mediocre in some respects and not others. And this is the thing, is comparing people is very difficult.
No, but also comparing people who are variable over time is difficult, because this is the idea, is that consciousness can change over time, the level of a person's consciousness. So when you talked about how Nietzsche's discussing how the priests and the socialists were poisoning the minds of the mediocre people with resentment, in my head, I interpret that as they're increasing the consciousness of the mediocre people. And that's...
I get what you're saying, but I think... So I think what I'm getting at as the argument against what you're saying, I agree, zoomed out. I agree that they're increasing their consciousness because they're making them aware of something that they may not have been aware of in the past.
And their state.
However, it's more than that. It's not that simple or that what's the word? Clean, sterile of a situation, because they may be creating an awareness of something that doesn't exist. That happens sometimes. It's a big. I mean, I'm not talking about Marx or anything.
Mind. It's still exercising the mind.
So my argument is that there are different uses of consciousness, and there is such a thing, I would say, as false consciousness. To go back to Marcuse, it is possible to believe something that is not true, I think. Because I believe that some things are true and some things aren't. So if one doesn't believe that there's any basis for truth, false consciousness, I guess, is a nonsense idea. But so the increase of false consciousness, I would argue, is maybe one of the worst things one could do. So if you are a highly conscious priest, if you're a priestly person, and what you're doing is you are, quote, spreading misinformation, as we like to talk about, that's a really, really negative thing to do, I think.
So you agree with Nietzsche?
Yeah, and in that respect, I do. So that's what I'm saying. I don't think all consciousness is equal once we're talking about what we want out of civilization. I think that we can have a sterile conversation that zooms out, and we can also have a practical conversation of, like, what are we looking for?
So I agree. The outcome of an increased consciousness isn't the same in the short term. I think it is in the long term. It's in that.
Well, but what about a false consciousness?
Because the idea is, and I guess you could say this is essentially what Christianity did, was by creating the false consciousness. Again, you selected for people who were good at doing that because they would survive more. So you were selecting for people who had the capacity for consciousness and an active mind more readily.
Right.
And so eventually consciousness is going to break out of that because it's smart, as happened, I think, in the Renaissance. And yeah, so it's the idea that Christianity was practicing, essentially. It was like it was the consciousness practice, and then it matured, and then people turned their back on it because of that. But I think it's the time frame that you're looking at, I think, is probably the difference between the way that you and I are looking at it. Because I'm saying that I think you're right. On the short term, a false consciousness can be defeating for civilization. But
I'm not talking about that, but yeah.
Well, that's what I'm saying, is I think it can actually Well, I don't know, actually. I guess, and we don't need... Yeah,
I mean, you could believe that volcanoes are safe. And then you're going to all die. That would be an example of false consciousness. So you have all your priests, and they tell you, no, that volcano is actually God, and he's actually here to save you. And then you're all going to die.
But I guess the reason that I said that, the false consciousness, a consciousness can work against civilization, and a false consciousness can. And maybe we will see, if the West is committing suicide right now as it feels, and it feels like it's doing it because of this underlying Christian morality, then... And if this underlying Christian morality is creating a false consciousness, then that would seem to add credence to the fact that you can have consciousness take down a civilization. But I guess I'm optimistic. I think it'll propagate regardless. And yeah, I guess I kind of see, again, Christianity was a necessary stepping stone, especially for Europe, who didn't really have any higher civilization until Rome.
Right.
And so this is another thing that Nietzsche talks about in the Antichrist. It's like Christianity was prime for a basically a more novice population when it comes to civilization, whereas Buddhism is for a population that is sort of older when it comes to civilization. So, of course, it happened in India, where you have a much longer history.
Right.
And still a decadent religion, still a religion of the upper, in that case. Well, in Buddhist case, it was of the upper class. But yeah, I think, I don't know. I keep coming back to the thinking that we actually see things eye to eye, and maybe are just talking about it on different time frames.
I'm not sure. I don't think I'm talking about mine on any time frame. I feel like...
Well, you have to when you're talking about consciousness.
I don't know what you mean by that, but okay.
Time doesn't exist without consciousness.
Yeah.
Anytime you're talking about time.
I don't know.
No, but
I don't get
that's
it.
why it's so hard to tag down, though, because again, it's like you can.
That's why I'm saying that this is where my argument is not good to have every conversation be about consciousness, because if we're talking about how to make a batch of cookies, we shouldn't start talking about consciousness.
No, obviously, but this is heavily about consciousness. What we're doing right now, obviously.
Well, I think it's more about cynical use of information and lies. Like, you have to be conscious to lie. I think that's true. But I think that the crux of it is not that you have to be conscious to lie. That's not Nietzsche's point at all. His point is that this entire structure is built off lies.
Yes, but it came from a highly conscious being that was being oppressed, i.e. Paul, i.e. the Jews. And that's what happens when you oppress conscious
Are you
individuals.
saying that's what Nietzsche's saying, or that's what you're saying?
I'm saying that Nietzsche essentially says this. This is where the resentment morality comes from.
I mean, I don't know if he thinks... I mean...
He doesn't say highly conscious, but he says it in other words.
No, I was talking more about the repressed thing with Paul. I'm not sure how repressed he thinks Paul was, but...
Oppressed.
Yeah, oppressed. I don't know how oppressed he thinks Paul was.
Well, the
either.
Christians were oppressed, and the Jews were generally oppressed by Rome. I mean, this was after the major Jewish wars. Or, no, Jesus was before that. Well, I think one of the main...
Which wars?
There were like 3 main wars that Rome had with Judea. Uh-huh. And I think at least one of them happened before Jesus. I mean, it must have,
right,
because
so
they were already there.
Paul's writings were from like the 30s to the 80s.
Yeah, and that was during, I think, maybe the most... that might have been when the Jews were finally expelled from Judea.
Right, but I think that Nietzsche would argue that most of this stuff is like Jewish and Christian mythology. Like, all of these tales are designed to spread the lies of Christianity.
Yes, I agree with that.
not so we can't
Or I
take
agree
we
that
can't take the
Nietzsche would say
idea that
that.
like these people were oppressed as even historically true. They are politically expedient for the priests of these religions.
I'm trying to just look at it objectively, like a philologist would.
Yeah.
As Nietzsche talks about
Yes,
why
yes.
philologists and priests don't get along. And philologists are trying to just read text unbiased.
Right.
I'm just trying to look at that period as unbiased.
Right.
That's all I'm trying to say with this stuff, is that they were oppressed, and in the sense that they were conquered.
Because Paul was an oppressor. That's his story.
Yes, but
He was a persecutor of Christians.
Yes, but he was also Jewish.
Right.
And he no doubt had pride for the homeland and saw what Rome was doing to the homeland. And so, yeah, I think that's where all those
I don't know about
ideas
the no doubt about that, but yeah.
Yeah, maybe not. Now we're reading minds, right? Again, I'm just trying to say how I would feel if I were Paul, essentially. And yeah. So there were actually a few things I wanted to point out, but we should probably wrap up soon.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. So this was a good sort of one about democracy again. The first Christian, and I fear also and I fear also the last Christian, whom I shall perhaps live to see, not in the slightest, is a rebel in his lowest instincts against everything privileged. He always lives and struggles for, quote, equal rights. So, democracy. And I thought how that Christianity is a rebellion against the church. I think that's interesting. And the Jewish church specifically, right? Freedom from convictions equals strength. We already covered that. Oh, I like this difference between Buddhism and Christianity. Buddhism makes no promises but keeps them. Christianity makes 1,000 promises but keeps none.
Yep, that's a good one.
Yeah. The resurrection, with which the entire concept blessedness, the whole and sole reality of the evangel, is juggled away for the benefit of the state after death. Right. Paul, with that rabbinical insolence which characterizes him in every respect, rationalized this interpretation, this indecency of an interpretation. Thus, if Christ is not resurrected from the dead, our faith is vain.
Yeah, I mean, that's true, but that's still Christian theology. If Christ wasn't resurrected, the whole thing comes crashing down.
Well, yeah, and that's... Yeah, I mean that, and it's a abstraction, right? It's a concept too, going to the point of non-real stuff and how Christianity's about non-reality, Buddhism versus about reality.
Also, if Christ isn't resurrected, that means that weakness is weak. It doesn't win. The meek do not inherit.
Say that again?
If Christ is not resurrected, it proves that weakness is weak and that the meek do not inherit. Because Christ is murdered pathetically. He doesn't fight back. He's weak. He acts weak, right, against the show of state force. And so theologically, he must rise because that force has to win. He can't be defeated by that. Right.
This was an interesting part, too, that I wanted to get your opinion on. So it says, the priest knows, this is in 38, the priest knows as well as anyone that there is no longer any God, any sinner, any redeemer, that free will, moral world order. Oh, yeah, I like that. He kept saying moral world order. I kept reading it as new world order. The moral world order are lies, intellectual seriousness. The profound self-overcoming of the intellect no longer permits anyone not to know about these things. So I started this because I was like, oh, wow. I mean, so did you interpret this as basically he's saying that he doesn't believe in free will?
I did, yes, I did get that, but he is holding people accountable, which feels like believing in free will.
Yeah, I agree.
I mean, he's holding society accountable, saying that basically nobody has any good reason to believe any of this stuff anymore.
Well, and also that, like the noble people, as we were discussing, are the ones that sort of do what they think is right, as if they have volition.
Right.
So, yeah, I saw that as an interesting line. Is that how it reads in yours?
Yeah,
too?
It was definitely a little bit funny. The priest knows as well as anyone that there is no God anymore, that there's no such thing as sin or the Redeemer, that free will and the moral world order are lies.
Christian shrewdness equals speaking from faith, acting from instincts.
Also, yeah, there's the Jewish stuff, but I think in summation, it's that like the Jews are uniquely good at resentment philosophy, and that Christianity is a form of Judaism, and it's essentially the perfect form of Judaism because it's the perfection of Jewish trickery and lies and deceit.
It is the logical end of the philosophy of Abraham, I think, is what he was saying. Yeah.
Yeah. It's part of the race. This is the Jewish race. The art of the holy lie, Christianity brings to perfection the whole of Judaism, a Jewish preparatory exercise and a technique developed over many hundreds of years with great seriousness. The Christian ultima ratio of lies is the Jew once again, or even 3 times again.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's interesting because, again, I read this similar to how we read Rosewater Lane, who talked about how, the Jews are these special, population of people, is this special population of people that does seem to have, for whatever reason, come to the conclusion before many others that, of this monotheistic God type. And of course, there's Zoroastrianism and Mithraism that sort of precede it, and that, and then you have, obviously stuff from the Vedas that influence it. So it was a conglomeration of a bunch of different religions, obviously, from the region, but it then centered on this specific type, on Abraham, of a one God that's judging you and that's telling you to do things, and that you need to, that you have the will, you have the ability to follow the rules. Right. And I think that was the big thing that Rosewater Lane pointed out that was different from the Abrahamic religions, from many of the other religions. I think that, and I agree with that, and I read that as they were just, it was, again, this hop in religion to a more conscious, incubating religion. It better incubated consciousness. Right. And that's why it exploded in popularity. To be like, I mean, it's like every religion, popular religion now is Abrahamic. So, and you have more civilization and consciousness everywhere than ever before. But yes, I'm sorry. I did bring up consciousness a lot. I didn't mean to. You were asking me a lot of questions, to be fair.
What? Yeah, you don't have to be sorry about it.
I wouldn't have talked about it as much if you weren't asking so many questions. So it's your fault. That's my point.
Sounds good.
Don't blame me. No, you blame me.
So what's the takeaway? The broad takeaway? Christianity sucks, according to Nietzsche.
Yeah, sorry, no, right before, because there's so much, and again, I didn't mean to get bogged down by the consciousness stuff, so I just want to get all this in. The guilt he's laying out the Christian morality, right? What is Jewish? What is Christian morality? Chance robbed of its innocence.
Right.
I like that for some reason. But yeah, it's because it's the idea that you are now interpreting even chance to something that was God given,
right?
And whether it was good or bad. But chance robbed of its innocence. I like that phrase.
Yep.
Misfortune dirtied by the concept sin. Well-being as a danger. But again, that's why, it's sin. It's an interpretation. Interpretation requires consciousness. So but we don't have to go down that road. But that's just trying to tell you why I think sin precedes consciousness. And then what does moral world order mean? That there exists once and for all a will of God as to what man is to do and what he is not to do. That the value of a nation, of an individual, is to be measured by how much or how little obedience is accorded the will of God. And the ruling power of the will of God, expressed as punishment and reward according to the degree of obedience, is demonstrated in the destiny of a nation, of an individual. The reality displaced by this pitiable lie is a parasitic kind of human being which prospers only at the expense of every healthy form of life. The priest abuses the name of God. He calls the state of society in which the priest determines the value of things the kingdom of God. He calls the means by which such a state is achieved or perpetuated the will of God. With cold-blooded cynicism, he assumes nations, epochs, individuals according to whether they were conducive to the rule of priests or whether they were resisted to it.
Nice.
So yeah, guilty equals punishment, piety equals reward. That's essentially Christian morality. And I thought this moral world order was actually probably a good way to conclude also, because it is this idea, and it gets back to this conviction thing where we started, about how I think this cleared up a big thing about what I think about Nietzsche is that, yeah, he's basically saying anybody that says this is absolutely true, you should look at them skeptically.
Right.
And which is a pro-conscious thing. So this is where I just think that he doesn't understand maybe the philosophical Nietzsche's an idiot is what I'm saying.
Nice.
No, he doesn't understand his philosophy, obviously. No, but anyway, yeah, sorry. I'll get off of that. But yeah, I think basically that is what he thinks, is that Christians have created a false reality, and it's selected for a sick human that can't survive as well as before. Right. Which I might it's certainly in isolation, I think that's true, in that many of us couldn't survive as well in isolation as before. And so it's bad.
Yeah. Yeah, that sounds right.
It's bad. Okay.
It's bad, yeah.
So are you not a Christian now?
Well, I haven't been a Christian the whole time.
You said I was making you a Christian.
Yeah. I think so, but I don't think I've ever actually been a Christian. I don't believe in the resurrection. That whole part of it is very silly to me.
Get out of my house.
Yeah, exactly. But I don't know. Nietzsche's he's a weird guy.
He is.
I feel like he does a lot of mind reading. He's got a lot of good snippets. He's good for quotes and he's good for sound bites. But overall, it's like reading a Twitter troll or something like that. It's like there's a lot. It's like Alex Jones or something like that.
Well, so thank you for saying that, because that was actually when we first started.
Yeah.
That was kind of how I said you should read him.
Right.
I was like, he's kind of a troll.
I'm getting that now.
Yes.
Because it's this thing where it's quite a claim to suggest this level of cynicism amongst the priestly class. I mean, he's thousands of years of people who don't believe what they're doing to be true in the name of sort of controlling a large mass of people. And it's not like I don't think that ever happens, but
Right.
it's quite a claim of a conspiracy.
Yeah, we didn't even talk about his diatribe against Luther.
Right. But this is what I'm saying is like he's really attributing a lot of
Malice.
and self-conscious malice,
Yes.
which feels to me to be a little bit much.
Yeah, I don't know. Because again, it's like I do kind of see where he's coming from when you consider the psychological makeup of a priest is going to be a highly conscious person. And I think as a conscious person, I'm just putting myself in their shoes. You're always thinking about every possibility. That's what consciousness is, and that's what a enriched consciousness is able to do, is able to think of all the different scenarios. So you can't help but think of I guess the malicious side of things and the non-malicious side of things. And so of course you're going to have a proportion of people go down the malicious side. And I guess your point is you're saying the question is what proportion? Because I think you would both agree that there's a proportion of, malicious priests and there's a proportion of
if you tell me it's every
priests.
pope, maybe that's not surprising to me.
It might have been every pope, yeah.
Right. But we're talking about like a couple hundred people.
Certainly the pope before and after that that pope from the Netherlands in like the 1400s, he was pope for a year and then anyway, mysteriously died. Okay.
And I know he's talking about like a priestly class, and the problem is that the world has shifted dramatically, and so that there's millions of pastors around the world who are probably all basically in the mediocre category.
Right.
And so I don't know, like, are they all cynically trying to manipulate their flock to? That just feels unlikely to me.
No, but that's why he went to the origin. He said, "Where did this come from?"
Right. His whole thing about the priestly origin too, I don't think is right. At least, I mean, the problem is he's saying that there is no such thing as biblical history; that it's just a crafty story made up by the priests. But he's saying where the priests came from, and in the Bible, the priests have been there all the way from the beginning of Israel, because he said that the priests took over at a certain point. But according to the Bible, the Levites, the clan of Levi, were the priests right off the bat.
But that sort of squares with Rosewater Lane, too. I mean, I don't know. I'm not a scholar of the Old Testament, so I will defer to you on this. But when I remember Rosewater Lane talking similarly, how it was kind of an anarchic, the early Jewish society was very anarchic, and that you didn't have a consolidated, ruling class.
So there was a time before they had a king, because they didn't have a king, and then they wanted a king.
Right.
But the laws, the laws in Leviticus and Deuteronomy were all there. Like those are the first 5 books of the Bible: Genesis, Exodus, Numbers, Leviticus, Deuteronomy.
Yes.
Like that's right. That's right away. That's before the kings.
Yeah.
And so the Levites are already named. Like right after they get out of Egypt, the Levites are named by God to be the priests, and they're already given what Nietzsche's talking about when he's saying that
they take over. I mean, again, I guess it just depends on.
Yeah,
what we mean
they
by
were
take
essentially
over.
the ones in charge.
They were.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, at
don't
least
know.
according
Okay.
to the Bible.
Yeah. Well, then is Nietzsche talking about the same time period?
Well, I don't know. But that's what I'm saying is it seems to me like he's suggesting that these cynical priests showed up later.
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, that I don't know. You might be right. Yeah, and I mean certainly I would think that we would have a better. No, I mean, but this you're just quoting the Bible, right? So we had this. Nietzsche had access to this and was no doubt knowledgeable about it. I mean,
right?
Yeah, I don't know. But yeah, I mean, I don't know. So I like this a lot, and and the reason is because again, it is just entertaining to read because he is so unhinged.
Right.
I mean, that's part of what makes it. It's the same reason why it's fun to listen to a crazy comedian in some sense.
Right,
You're like,
right.
this guy is out there.
Yeah.
And because like I definitely don't agree with everything he's saying in here, but I do definitely agree that the Christian morality, I see what he's talking about with this destructive element in Christianity.
Right.
And I see what he's talking about with this democratic and egalitarian element in Christianity. And that's why I can't get it out of my head when I'm looking at, Judith Butler and everything like that.
Right.
So, yeah.
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 Cool.
But, yeah, it is amazing how just influential Nietzsche is. Because it's just reading this, and then it's just you see how Foucault writes and his method, and you see Judith Butler and her their method. Yeah, I caught myself.
Yeah. Cool.
So Schopenhauer we could do.
Sure.
So he has something on boredom actually that I think would be good to read. Because especially Nietzsche was talking about boredom and how boredom was so important for there's this. So basically, Schopenhauer thinks boredom is proof of. I want to say I'm looking for the right word. Because I'm sure I'm going to listen back to this and be like, yeah, you didn't get it right. But it's like proof of the nothingness of life or of nothingness of existence.
Yeah.
Anyway, yeah.
Okay. That sounds cheery.
Cool. Oh, yeah. No, I mean, it's not. I mean,
Yeah.
Schopenhauer, he's a pessimist.
Nice.
It's pessimistic philosophy. So we don't have to do it if you want to do something
No,
more
I think it's fine. I wouldn't
upbeat.
mind going back and doing some history. I'm in a little bit of a history mood lately. So maybe we do Schopenhauer and then we do some history.
Yeah. Well, I guess that depends on what Mr. T thinks and if he will be coming back.
Yes.
Then I did reach out. He might be in Finland now.
Okay.
So I'll get back to you. But yeah, I'm down to do history.
Okay.
We give I guess doing like anthologies has always kind of worked for us, right? For
anthologies?
How we do it. Or not, I don't know if that would be, yeah, I think that would be the way to describe it. Just like little sections. Like it's not a book on one person or one thing. I mean, like we could do it that way, but like when we did the doctor's book, it was like a bunch of sections on different doctors. Mm-hmm. So we could do it kind of worked for what we did.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah.
I'll think about books. You could think about books too, especially if there's any. Is there a time period you're interested in?
No, I mean, I guess I didn't have anything in particular, but
Okay.
Yeah. All right. So we got Schopenhauer boredom. Do you know the name of it, or you can send it to me?
Hang on, let me find it.
Okay.
You got a show tonight,
Yes.
so we should probably wrap it up.
Yes.
Sorry.
No, that's okay.
I think it's On the Vanity of Existence.
Oh, boy.
Essays and Aphorisms is where I'm reading it from.
Okay.
So, yeah, these are all short essays.
Okay.
So if there's another thing in here, like we can read that one, but
Okay.
there might be one that's better. That might also not be. He has one on suicide. That sounds. Oh yeah, this has the one on women. I don't know if I want to read that though.
Let's not.
Yeah.
I mean, we could read it, but maybe.
Nah, it's just manosphere stuff. Okay. Yeah. Let's do. I'm pretty sure it's On the Vanity of Existence.
Okay. Cool. All right.
Wait. Oh. No, okay. On the Suffering of the World.
Okay.
You're going to love this.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we'll do On the Suffering of the World.
Nice.
And, I mean, we could keep it short if you want. It's just 10 pages.
That's a little short. I mean, maybe we do that and another one.
Okay, well, if you want to look through and
Yeah.
think if
Sounds
do you
good.
like any, I'll also do that, and I'll let you know.
Okay.
But yeah, I'll let you go because you got to run.
All right. Well, we did it, folks. That was Nietzsche. That was the Antichrist. Tune in next week for some Schopenhauer.
Yeah. Also, I do think Antichrist gets flagged. I posted on my story with a quote that I was reading, and I put the Antichrist, and it sat there with like 0 views for 60 minutes, and then I deleted it and did the same thing and put like a star where the eye was,
And it worked.
and millions saw it.
Nice.
It's actually the most popular story of all time.
Yeah, wow.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Anyway, have a good
right.
show. Break
Bye.
a string. Blah 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 blah. Cool. What time's your